Welcome. This presentation will equip you with information about the Western Cape Government Safety and Security Strategy. It will also equip you with the procurement or sourcing strategy for security services. The Western Cape Government, WCG, analysed the safety and security response for the province through a consultative process with various stakeholders to develop a complete safety and security strategy for the province. The analysis recommended how WCG at a policy level advances security through resourcing and organised security functions across all its institutions. The strategy was designed to provide a strategic roadmap to enable the WCG to make a dynamic shift in how security is viewed and how it contributes to the overall performance and requirements of the WCG. The 2017 Transversal Security Framework Agreement was concluded in compliance with the Cabinet-approved strategy via a competitive bidding process, enabled the WCG to appoint one or more service providers to execute a service over the contract term on an instructed basis, within scope. In addition, the strategy aimed to better position the WCG to contribute to the improvement of wider social conditions, which currently undermine security and safety. Provincial Treasury, through the utilization of spending and data analysis from a strategic sourcing context, identified security services and related commodities as one of the immediate priority areas for efficiencies in process, quality, and spending, in keeping with its mandate to address more efficient, effective, and transparent financial management. In essence, the aim of the WCG safety and strategy is to put in place a comprehensive transversal approach for organizational resilience and to set strategic conditions for operational success for the safety and security needs of the WCG. The transversal, whole-of-government approach to safety and security addresses organizational issues and introduces innovative thinking in the approach to security requirements. This called for uniformity and standardization in process, procedure, and specifications across the WCG. Understanding and defining the problem required a robust, fact-based safety and security assessment, and the identification of medium-term opportunities and short-term actions. Articulating the response to the safety and security strategy resulted in defining the appropriate levels of control that would bring about improvements in security and safety across WCG. To maximize the safety contribution to WCG institutions, assets, and people, a key focus is on the wide spectrum of functions and services that are delivered. The technical aspects of security services inclusive of risk assessments. Guidelines for conducting security risk assessments where security services are required. Using international best practices as benchmarks for government departments, and an outcomes-based solution with performance measurement as a key principle and enabler. A range of research methods including desk research, site visits, interviews, and mapping was used to answer a range of questions. The WCG covers a range of departments that differ in function and location. In order to perform their designated, the 2017 Transversal Security Framework Agreement comprised the following portfolio of facilities. WCG ministries, departmental head offices, and district offices. Schools, hospitals and associated training establishments, clinics, community health centers, and other health facilities. Museums, art galleries, libraries, sports, and other cultural facilities. Research and other such establishments, under the Department of Agriculture. Public housing estates under construction under the Department of Human Settlements. Correction centers under the Department of Social Development. Departments whose role cuts across the core business of all other departments such as the Department of Transport and Public Works and the Department of Community Safety. Given the varied functions and services that the WCG performs across a range of institutions, the threats to institutions take many forms and are not consistent across the province. Threats are more evident in the Cape Town metropolitan area. Theft occurs most likely at an opportunity petty theft level but also at a larger scale, for example the theft of metal fencing. Burglary is more deliberate in areas holding items of value. It can also include acts of physical violence. The greater concern is the exposure of staff and the public, at public institutions, especially schools and hospitals, where diverse sections of the public and staff interact. Vandalism is typically based on ease of access, opportunity, and escape. It, therefore, affects perimeter fences, windows and areas less easily secured. Gangsterism and syndicated crime, including illegal drug-related activities. Gangsterism tends to be a more localized phenomenon. An institution, most likely a school or a hospital, is more likely to be affected by gang culture if it is in or close to the area deemed to be their territory. The impact of threats was categorized as loss of assets, damage to assets, physical injury or loss of life, disruption/failure of business processes and service delivery, damage to the organization's reputation, in the eyes of the public, media, business partners, suppliers/customers, etc., low levels of morale and or trust, internal, e.g., staff, or external, e.g., school pupils, hospital patients, blame game, inertia, stagnation of local activity around the institution. In the case of schools affected, poor attendance is experienced by pupils and staff. The following factors create conditions in which security is more likely to be undermined. Attractiveness would be in relation to any assets such as infrastructure, equipment, stock, information, and people. This may be on its own or in combination present a potentially attractive target for an attack or other forms of exploitation by criminals or other persons intent on creating disorder if the reward is motivation for taking the risk. These assets may include buildings, which have national or other significant status, key infrastructure, cash handling facilities, and sensitive information. Organizations must make a judgment on the value they place on their various assets, in order to determine whether they need protection, the nature of that protection, and to what extent. Vulnerability is when the asset has a natural level of exposure to threat, for example, by its location and or the activities associated with it, which could be abused by a deliberate, spiteful act. This is also an area where organizations can judge, by asking the question what if. Threat is when there is a person or a group or groups of persons, who have the intent and the know-how to deliver harm to an asset. A range of research methods including desk research, site visits, interviews, and mapping were used to answer a range of questions. To improve on the past requires a model that encourages first identifying, and then, changing things. Any action requires a motivated party to engage in an act of crime, as well as opportunity. Reducing opportunities for harmful acts decreases the chance of harm occurring. A careful and consistent focus on reducing opportunities pays dividends. A future-fit model requires pulling together knowledge, capacity, and resources. Carefully and consistently back-to-back implemented initiatives, no matter how trivial, make places safe. Safety is typically not primarily about doing big things, it is about doing small things, and doing them well. The principle of identifying, mobilizing, and integrating the right resources is to implement successful safety initiatives. One must have the freedom to choose the means that are most appropriate to the task at hand. Safety is everybody's business. One needs to be able to use budgetary resources to help everyone get involved. Having a security budget does not mean having a larger budget but having a flexible budget. What is required is a complete toolbox. The important thing to note is value for money and what your budget can buy to attain desired value for money. The concept of resilience is central to the safety and security strategy and represents a major shift that is needed in WCG departments. However, resilience is based on prospects that are impossible to predict. The aim should be on making an organization less appealing through implementing risk-based and robust control measures. The concentration of security resources must be on assets of greater value and accepting informed risk elsewhere. Hence, safety and security must be aligned with the core business function of departments. Ownership is the concept to instill the value that safety is everybody's responsibility. The approach is simple but powerful if it is carefully and consistently applied. The whole of society approach does not advocate a one-size-fits-all. Context matters. Implementation requires thought. The model encourages flexibility that must be applied across a wide variety of settings and must be shaped to fit the requirements of places and organizations. It is also wise to allow for a trial period before rolling out the model. Find initiatives that already incorporate the whole of society approach. This allows for the fast tracking of initiatives, the development of a common vision and understanding of how to best manage greater safety and security is driven by the Department of Community Safety and WCG departments. 1. In terms of the analysis done, safety and security within the WCG was approached in piecemeal and disaggregated and did not create and sustain a more operating environment. 2. There was a lack of wider organization alignment of ownership, resources, authority, responsibility, and accountability, in respect of security. 3. Expenditure was not well defined apart from guarding services. 4. Data and information systems required to inform the understanding and decision-making in terms of threat and security environments were lacking or non-exploitable. 5. The approach to the selection and management of guarding services seemed to be based on the lowest cost only, whereas consideration should be given to wider value to the organization and the ability to measure such value. 6. Security was not preemptively considered in the design of buildings or renovations, which may lead to continual or ultimately more expensive measures in terms of the securing of buildings. The strategy indicated opportunities for improvement as it relates to safety and was broadly envisaged to be as follows. Policy and strategy. Including a policy framework focused to a lesser extent on compliance and more on guiding the WCG departments on how to manage security better in a more agile, risk-based, and asset value-based approach. Structure and organization. Creation of a more coherent security structure that is integrated with departmental core business and other areas of risk management. Ownership of the security function at the appropriate level within the organization. Clearer identification of resources devoted to security with clear lines of authority, responsibility, and accountability. Creation of proper security management and advisory capacity. Process and methodologies. The integrated risk-based approach to security. Consistency of procurement of security services and systems. Performance management of statutory, contract, and service delivery requirements. Improved systems for asset management and monitoring of losses. Involving security at the design stage. Inventory control business processes. Information management. The balance between in- and outsourcing and a more agile risk-based approach to how guards patrol and oversee their areas. The creation of natural surveillance through business activity. Skills and training. Creating capacity to energize change. Security awareness training and creation of a more proactive security culture across the Western Cape government. Training on tool and templates. Provincial challenges identified were applying the principles, other models, embedded structures, and effective changes agents. Implementing the approaches in principle easy. It requires care and consistently finding ways of applying the principles. This requires identifying challenges and applying the 4 principles. In practice, things may not be that easy. Initiatives are not implemented on open terrain. It is typically already crowded with other models and established ways of doing things that are very resilient. They are difficult to dislodge because they are embedded in the structure and culture of institutions. The province and the institutions supported by it needed to become effective change agents, developing ways of dislodging old practices and introducing new ones. The institutionalization of the strategy has been facilitated by focusing on 5 strategic thrusts, designed to drive and develop the strategy toward achieving the outcome. Each thrust represents a key area that needs to be managed to ensure continuous development within WCG structures, processes, systems, and methodologies. Outcomes are aligned to the multi-year strategic plan, annual performance plan, and business plans of individual directorates.
Key recommendations in respect of the proposed security strategy for the Western Cape government were as follows. For security design, security as an enabler of the core business. Ownership of security, authority, responsibility, and accountability. Risk-based response. Must be able to deter, detect, disrupt, respond and recover. Generate the required understanding amongst the target community. A more holistic security approach and part of the design process from the outset. In terms of ICT, establishment of core ICT teams. Clustering of regional security operations. Security performance management and incident registers. Western Cape government construction and facilities upgrade to include security. Solution with appropriate planning, bandwidth, and integration. ICT platform for mobile devices which includes tablets, smartphones, etc., and for implementation it would be implementation of a proposed security strategy and ICT implementation.
Once the strategy was approved, departments had to agree on a process and create procedures to roll out the implementation of the principles included in the WCG security strategy. This resulted in the security procurement strategy. The parties had to have a clear understanding of the service strategy, current procurement processes, identifying gaps in current processes, the identification of opportunities, and the proposal of the process to be developed and implemented. The framework for the strategy aims to provide a guideline to ensure that the benefits of strategy implementation can be tracked and managed over time, focusing on governance, people, systems, processes, and data. In terms of the governance element, it would be defining the tight versus flexible principles as well as comparative, qualitative, principles that should be achieved during the security service category analysis. The people element refers to defining the roles and responsibilities within the supply chain management process, from demand management, planning, through to sourcing and procurement management to contract management. Systems, process, and data identify and describes the types of tool and methods that may be required to assist with the implementation of a security service sourcing strategy. The elements highlighted in the pyramid are flanked by supplier or market readiness to respond to the new processes as well as suitable contract management as weak as the measurement and benefits framework to assess the expected value created by implementing the strategy. The procurement strategy considered key factors in the current state at that point in time and how to move the future envisaged state. The current state included issues such as the cheapest bid accepted, not always the best solution. Big security players don't respond, can't compete with small firms. Skeleton companies submit proposals. Specifications are very specific. Selecting security service providers with no Western Cape presence. Limited contract and performance management. Lack of end-to-end value chain view. Security outsourcing is currently very reactive. Non-standard SCM processes followed. To reach the envisaged future state of security would have to consider categorization of security risks, low, medium, high. Solution-based security service outsourcing. Effective integration and communication between community safety, security, and risk management, and user departments SCM throughout the entire process. Contract and supplier performance management is embedded as part of the end-to-end process. Proactive notification of security outsourcing requirements upfront to all stakeholders. Standardized SCM processes. Initial findings included the legal and legislative constraints on the process. Communication and interdepartmental interaction were also identified as critical to deriving maximum benefit. 3 high-level activities were identified as follows. A. Development of request for proposal, namely user specifications defining departmental needs including risk assessment processes by the Department of Community Safety. B. Contract award, which is the domain of the SCM unit of the user department in consultation with the provincial treasury, and C. Contract management, by the user department in consultation with its key stakeholders. Points for consideration include frequency of risk assessments. Remote areas, risk assessments / service providers resource capacity of community safety. Availability of community safety. Avoidance of crisis sourcing. Term of current security service provider contract. Supplier database. Database of facilities. SIRA regulations. Incident reporting. Resource capacity for departments. A tender for the total security solution. The tender evaluation process. Terms of reference/specifications. Service level agreements. Joint process involvement across departments. Challenges identified to reach the future state of having risk-based value-adding security services, such as the gap between terms of reference, bidding documents, and service level agreement. Skeleton companies, selecting service providers with no Western Cape presence. Buy-in from all relevant stakeholders to take this forward. Lack of accountability. Lack of supplier readiness. Lack of mapped process for sourcing security. Lack of change management strategy to influence integration. Lack of communication between stakeholder departments. One-dimensional application of supply chain processes. Benefits for the security sourcing strategy include but are not limited to effective communication between supply chain management and community safety during the sourcing process. A holistic integrated security solution that includes a security plan and risk assessment. Value for money. A clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities. Reduction of losses. Clear communication between community safety and other departments. Give training to supply chain officials to achieve standardized bidding documents. Give training to service providers to make them aware of what is expected from them. To be able to hold the service provider responsible and accountable for their actions. The Provincial Treasury undertook in terms of implementation of the sourcing strategy for security, to incrementally issue minimum requirements to be adhered to by provincial departments when procuring security services. Standardized processes and tools are furthermore envisaged in this regard. The first standardized tool to support greater coherence in the procurement of security services is the establishment of a transversal framework agreement for the provision of security services. The framework agreement is in essence a pre-approved list of service providers that meet the requirements of tender and pricing requirements, with a broader scope of services to be procured for a certain volume or quantity of services over a specific period and against an agreed sum or rate per item, established via a competitive procurement process. Its intent was to streamline the procurement of security services from the open market in order to fulfill the Western Cape government's strategic objectives while maintaining transparency, fairness, and equitability in the procurement process. The main objective of the Security Framework Agreement in its current format is to enable the WCG to appoint service providers to execute services over the term of the Framework Agreement on an instructed basis, within its defined scope. That is the end of our presentation. Thank you.